It's the film that unleashed demons, souls of the damned, and an insurmountable horde of internet Wanda fans onto the multiverse. On today's episode, we review Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So watch your neck, because the byword begins now. Welcome to another all-inclusive episode of the Nerd Byword, the only podcast that can review films without resorting to googly-eyed graphics. Dave and I are here with our masculinity intact to review Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which was recently released on Disney+. Was our resident horror fanatic pleased with this Sam Raimi flick, or was his bloodlust left wanting? Only time will tell. But first, it's time for... Really, Dave? Starting off with a killing spree a bit early in the news segment?
I can't help myself. You gotta get started somehow. This news story is kind of niche if you're a fan of the video game Overwatch, because there's some movement coming now on the sequel, Overwatch 2, which was announced several years back, and then hit some snags and, has been delayed a few times. It appears to be now coming in October. October 4th to be precise, and as it looks, the original plans have changed massively. Apparently, upon original announcement, the plan that Blizzard had put in place was to sort of patch and update the original Overwatch game and create a sort of shared multiplayer environment between the original and the sequel, while still leaving the original playable in some state. That has apparently gone out of the window as Blizzard has decided to go into a different direction. Now, when Overwatch 2 drops in October, it will actually replace the original Overwatch game. Basically, you're going to get a large update file that's going to get rid of the original game and just replace it with Overwatch 2. The PvP, player versus player mode, is going to go free to play, with a announced PvE mode, basically a campaign for lack of better term, being delayed further and arriving separately at a later point. Now, this is notable because Overwatch, it's always been a constantly changing animal with tweaks coming, through various updates. But this is a pretty significant change in game mechanics, as the 6v6 game mode is going to be scrapped in favor of a 5v5 game mode instead. There's also basically the new game is running on a completely different engine, which is one of the reasons why it took a little longer to make this. But beyond that, it's also pretty light in new features, but beyond some tweaks. From my understanding, there's going to be a new hero in Season 1, and in Season 2, there's going to be a new hero and a new map. And that seems to be pretty much the extent of the Overwatch 2 situation, which is not much of an update. Yet at the same time, it is going to radically change, the way the game is played, as every little balance change, can have huge impacts on this game. Obviously, from a game preservation standpoint, this is kind of, sad. You look at something like Team Fortress 2, which has been, running on PC what seems like forever at this point. I didn't really see a reason to completely eliminate the original Overwatch game here. But apparently there's a pretty strong movement here from Blizzard to make sure that everybody gets on board with Overwatch 2. Not quite sure how to feel about this. I will freely admit I haven't played Overwatch in a little while. I did play it religiously there for a little while. Almost on a daily basis. It was my main escape for a hot second, and I have very fond memories of the game. But it's the whole situation is just extremely weird, as you're basically talking about something being a sequel, and on the other hand, it seems to be more like a substantial update to the game, rather than like something that has enough content to be considered a true sequel. And then on top of that, whatever this campaign PvE is eventually going to shape to be, who knows when we're getting it at this point, as it's been delayed yet again, and it's going to arrive separately. It's a very, very odd situation for a game that I have a lot of warm and fuzzies for. What are your thoughts about this, Kris?
This is crazy. So it's almost like a Pokemon evolving and it can't go back. So
pretty much,
yeah. So this is crazy, and I'm glad that I heard this news, because I've long kind of been sitting on the sidelines looking and like thinking about starting playing Overwatch, but now I know to don't really invest a whole lot if everything's going to be wiped, when Overwatch 2 comes out. So I'll just continue waiting, and that seems to be like the thing to do with the delays and everything. I'm as we've talked about ad nauseum on the show, I'm very much more a PvE campaign type of player. I kind of just like sitting in a bubble. Anything that takes up a lot of time to strategize with the team and having to network with a bunch of people on mic is more of a commitment than I can generally make when it comes to video games. So it's just not my vibe. So if anything, I'll probably wait till the PvE is released to dive in here. But yeah, this is wild.
Yeah, I mean, the good news about the free-to-play PvP situation is that, it's probably going to get some people to try it that would probably have not tried it otherwise. And the bones of the game are extremely good. At least, for part 1. I'm assuming that a lot of that is going to continue into part 2. So I think there's, a very worthwhile game in there. It's just a very, very odd way to go about this. All right. So, Kris, you have some interesting Star Trek news for us.
Yeah. Paramount Plus's hit comedy series Star Trek Lower Decks will be getting its own 3-issue comic book miniseries from IDW in September. Eisner Award-winning writer Ryan North, perhaps best known for his work on The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, is penning the script, while Chris Fenoglio handles art duties. The animated series, a previous nerd commendation of yours truly, which is set to release its 3rd season on Paramount Plus sometime this summer, has been a breath of fresh air in an often far too self-serious franchise like Trek. The comic will follow the further adventures of Beckett Mariner, Brad Boimler, Samantha Rutherford, and Devon Attendee, with one of the first issue covers bolstering the phrase, "rarely going where no one has gone before." This book is sure to encapsulate what fans love so much about the show. The title is set to release September 14th of this year. And again, this is basically, for all intents and purposes, I don't want to go to the level of like a Robot Chicken Star Wars, but like kind of like that corner cubicle of select set of cubicles that people are like on the lower rung of the totem pole that are kind of forgotten about in the grand scheme of things. Star Trek is very much like, look at this captain, look at the first lieutenant, all these officers and how they lead. And it's very, very a serious thing. And so to kind of turn that on its head and to make like this satirical jokes and to be self-incriminating like that, it's really, really a fun kind of change of pace for Star Trek. So again, Star Trek Lower Decks, I recommend it again and again and again. And to see this 3-issue miniseries, I have not read The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, but I get the vibe, and it seems like it's a perfect creative team to have on the title.
See, I like the humorous take on venerable franchises, which is why, among many other things, I'm a big fan of the Harley Quinn HBO Max show that we just talked about last week. So I've still not watched Star Trek Lower Decks, but it is very high up on my list of something that I want to check out. And much like Harley Quinn had a very successful mini-series spin-off there that bridged the gap between season 2 and 3, I can see this probably doing very well also. So as soon as I get the chance to dive into the actual animated series, I'm also going to jump onto this comic book. You better believe that, Kris. It sounds like it's right up my alley.
All right, that wraps up our nerd news segment. When we come back from this, our first break, we're going to be reviewing Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say. And let's talk about movies. With over 3,000 films log, Andrew and I, best friends since middle school, have dedicated our lives to watching, making, and talking about movies. Each week, Andrew and I handpick a movie he's seen, I've seen, or neither of us have seen, and dive deep into anything and everything two wannabe cinephiles could ever think of. From horror to dramedy, we do it all. So join us as we talk about everything movies, and maybe you too can become a bona fide cinephile.
Welcome back, and welcome to today's Byword Big Talk. And celebrating the Disney Plus release of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is undoubtedly in the midst of a global pandemic and the continuing effects of that illness, gives a lot of folks a greater opportunity to have viewed the film. So we have waited until this release to review the film. And so, as is our custom, we have each 3 likes and 3 dislikes of the film to kind of give you a balanced view of what we thought of it, and then we'll go to an overall grade. So, Dave, what is the first like of this? I saw this one from outer space.
Well, I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise as a huge horror movie fan that just the little horror vibes that Sam Raimi infused this movie with were right up my alley. When a lot of people heard, oh, Sam Raimi is going to be directing an MCU movie, it was all about shades of, his original Spider-Man trilogy and all that. But for me, Raimi is best defined for some of his early work in the horror genre. And I would really give my left foot for him to actually direct a full-on horror movie again. I think he has a strong talent and a lot of experience in that direction. So when they said Multiverse of Madness is going to have, some horror movie vibes and they're going to have Sam Raimi direct, it felt like this was going to be like the closest thing we're going to get to a Sam Raimi horror movie for a while. And the cool thing is that although the movie, for the most part, I would say was not scary, it played so well with horror movie imagery. There was just so much to love here. The cool mirror scene, with Wanda and how she comes through, this reflective surface and has all these different cuts on her face and stuff. The whole cape made of the souls of the damned, zombie Doctor Strange, all of these little, very horror things sort of repackaged for the superhero genre. And I really, really adored that. One of my favorite scenes in Spider-Man 2 is still, the operating room scene with Dr. Octopus, which was just straight out of, the Sam Raimi playbook. That scene is just absolutely flawless. And so seeing that Sam Raimi direct an MCU movie was a ton of fun. Now, again, I want to qualify. This is not a horror movie. It's, a superhero movie. It is definitely an MCU movie through and through. But easily the coolest thing about it is that it actually played a little bit with the visuals, and I think you're going to talk more about that later. And by infusing some horror touches into it, it created a movie that had a pretty unique look across what we've seen in the MCU before. And you and I have talked about this previously, how it's so important that the MCU keeps diversifying, creating variety. Not every movie can look the same, not every movie can feel the same. This is the only way that this movie franchise can continue. And bringing in somebody like Sam Raimi to direct a movie in this vein was absolutely the right call. And so all the horror stuff, all the kind of scary vibes, even though they weren't all that scary, were absolutely perfect, man.
Speak for yourself. They were very scary. When she pulled that, full spoilers, by the way, if you haven't watched the movie, why are you listening to a review episode? But if you have not watched the movie, full spoilers. When she came through the mirror, like that girl out of the ring, and was twitching and her limbs were all over the place, that was legitimately terrifying. And then I also got shades of Insidious all the jump scares and everything. That was probably the closest that I could, in my limited knowledge of scary movies, but like that's exactly what it reminded me of. A lot of jump scares in this movie. When she's chasing them down, when they're on their way to look for the Book of the Vishanti, and they're in those like looks like sewer tunnels or something, and she comes around the corner like that. It's absolutely crazy. So yeah, I'll talk more about that in my first like, but to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, for me, I think we've talked about this before, but I think my favorite MCU movies are the ones where they have a very individualistic director and they let them just run wild with their vision. Thor Love and Thunder is probably my most anticipated MCU movie in a very long time. I'll even bridge beyond that. It's probably the most anticipated movie I've been waiting and dying to see for a very, very long time. I'm such a fan of Taika Waititi. I can't speak highly enough about Jason Aaron's Thor. And so like all those things converging at once have me just like bursting at the seams. And so I think with something like Guardians of the Galaxy, and Thor Ragnarok, and now this, the best MCU movies, the Russo brothers with like Winter Soldier and stuff, it's just let those creative people create, let them cook, and I think it was definitely in this film's benefit here.
Absolutely, I'll wholeheartedly agree with that. All right, Kris, so what was your first major like of Multiverse of Madness?
The visuals. I mean, it was so creative. It was so imaginative. And like we said, you've got to diversify. You've got to switch it up. You've got to evolve at this point. We're getting, to borrow your phrase, long in the tooth with 20 plus films now. How are you going to make it stand out? And that's perhaps one of the criticisms of something like The Eternals, is where, yes, it was visually beautiful, but it didn't really stand out, and it wasn't really unique in a lot of senses, perhaps story-wise or in other facets of the film. But I think this one they just went for it. And I'm thinking I'm going to save the scene in particular that is one of your likes, that was probably the best visual of the film, and we'll talk about in a moment. But when they were traveling through the different multiverses in the first third of the film, that was just nuts. I mean, there was like a cartoon universe. There was a hint towards the Savage Land from the X-Men universe with dinosaurs and everything. That was really cool. And to the point where there's an entire universe where they're just paint. I mean, like, it was so imaginative. It was so cool. They got broken up into cubes. Wielding the souls of the damned as like this Dracula Untold type of cape / wings was really, really cool. I mean, they freaking went Marvel zombies, and they gave us full on zombie Doctor Strange, and that was really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that goes along, with my touch of horror thing. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Visually speaking, they did a lot of really, really cool things in this. And again, it's that diversification that we're constantly looking for. This movie doesn't really look like other movies in the MCU. It's funny, when Mordo is doing like this whole, sort of spiel exposition dump, when he first meets, the Doctor Strange of, let's say, the main MCU. There's these fade in, fade out transitions and stuff that they're using. And I saw recently somebody on social media say that it made it look like some cheap 90s horror movie. And I'm like, cheap? Certainly not. But horror movie? Yes, that's exactly the point, dude. It doesn't look like other MCU movies, and that's absolutely a good thing.
The other one that was like kind of shook me was when Wanda dreamwalks into the, I believe it's 838 version of herself, and she does that look to camera. It's absolutely jolting.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
All right, Dave, your next like is really an interesting one and lots to talk about here.
Yeah, I am not familiar with the America Chavez character, and I understand that there were some people that were pretty unhappy, generally speaking, with changes to powers and portrayal. And I understand and sympathize with that, especially given some of the things that have happened, with the Ms. Marvel show recently over the first 3 episodes, at least, the first 3 that I've seen. So I totally, wholeheartedly sympathize with America Chavez fans who weren't happy with the character in Multiverse of Madness. However, I will say that as somebody who's not familiar with the character, I found the character very, very interesting here. I think a lot of that has to do with the acting and the portrayal. There's sort of an effortless charm to America Chavez in this movie that I found really, really endearing. And made me really, look forward to maybe having that character bounce off some of the other recent additions to the MCU. Just imagining, her earnestness bouncing off of somebody like, Yelena Belova, for example, would be absolutely hilarious. So I was very, very taken with America Chavez as a character. There are things about the character that I didn't quite understand. I think probably the biggest unanswered question for me was at the end of the movie when she decides to stay in the MCU basically, rather than continuing to travel and looking for, her mother's. I didn't quite understand that. The implication being that she's going to stick around for a while. Why? But everything leading up to that was very, very cool. And again, I sympathize with people who didn't like this particular version of the character. But, just coming in completely, cold turkey, so to speak, and knowing nothing except for the name about this character, I thought this was a really cool MCU introduction of a new character that I hope we see more of, Chris.
You're scared of that Spanish name, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and I'm touching it.
Xochitl Gomez. I think they've anglicized it a little bit, like in mass media, as Xochi Gomez. Yeah, she's great. I think from what I've experienced from fans online and my personal friends, is the biggest reservation is that America Chavez in the comics has typically been depicted as an Afro-Latina, or whatever that means when she's like a multiversal being, entity. Long story short, she has historically been depicted with a darker skin tone. And so that is, I think, the biggest criticism of this casting, which is of absolutely no fault towards Xochitl Gomez herself. And I truly did enjoy her in this film. You nailed it when you're talking about like this just innate charm that she has as a character. I think her star is on the rise, and I think great things are coming for her in the future. She's only 16 years old, and it's crazy to have those kind of acting chops at that young of an age. So I truly did love this character. I'll talk about that character arc more in a minute, but I also was not crazy about her staying in Camartage as opposed to looking for her parents. That was weird.
Yeah. Well, you and I, great minds think alike, right? So what was your second major like of the movie, Chris?
Well, just wait till we talk about Wanda.
Oi.
So I really liked the three major character arcs. And like I said in our 100th episode, when we were taking a look back on the things that we've learned, I've really started to kind of diagram and dissect media as a whole a lot more, thanks to this show. And so I really appreciated the three major character arcs that we saw in this film. And those three being Steven, Wanda, and America. First and foremost, Steven being kind of the beginning, middle, and end, and going on this journey of, while traveling the multiverse, discovering things about himself and his shortcomings, and having to be that control freak, and that through line of having to be the one holding the knife that Christine presents to him. And just that tragic star-crossed lovers type of situation. It was really heartbreaking because you see all of the emotion and all of the affection that he has for Christine, as he says, "I love you" in every universe, and for that to be, not to be the end game as he wants it to be, and he just can't help being who he is and getting in over his head and in too deep with with the Darkhold or whatever. That was really cool to watch. And I like that it was not like this happy-go-lucky ending for him, and that it was complicated and that it was messy. So I enjoyed that. I also WandaVision was a really complicated viewing experience for me because the hemming and the hawing and just it gave vibes of like white liberal whataboutism, and just I didn't feel enough resolution in the end there for Wanda's actions. And so for me, I think that her fully leaning into this character, and of course it is under the influence of the Darkhold, so while some people might see it as unfortunate that she did a complete villain turn, you can kind of see the influence of the Darkhold at play because you saw what it also did to Steven in another universe. So I think also being a parent, and sometimes when you're emotional and people that you love are involved, you make irrational decisions because you're overcome with emotion and you can't see logic. And I can fully attest to that. But then not just giving her this, like with Steven, this happy-go-lucky ending, and she had to go full circle and see what she had become and that resolution there. And then I think perhaps my favorite arc was America's, except for the whole, I'm a student in Commartage and I made sparks. That wasn't my favorite, but I did love the idea of her self-doubt being kind of wiped away at the end of the film, and the revelation that she actually subconsciously had been in control of her powers and not realizing her full potential that was there the whole time. So I thought that was a really beautiful arc as well. And I'm excited to see her in future MCU projects, just hopefully not just another monk at Kamar-Taj.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. Yeah, I think this is actually one of the things that was fairly well thought out, is, what is going on with each of the individual, main characters. At least these three in particular. I think there were some missteps with some of the supporting characters, I guess, if you want to say. But these three arcs were extremely well thought out. Now, I don't think the script always lived up to those arcs, but I think overall it is fair to say that you're exactly correct. These three arcs and how they move from point A to point B was pretty darn well thought out. Except, I will add one caveat to that, and that is simply that this movie relied a little heavily on the power of the pep talk. And I know that's an old standby, but I think there could have been more like character stuff happening there instead of a pep talk. I'm specifically thinking about, Doctor Strange is being overwhelmed by the souls of the damned, but he gets a pep talk, and now he suddenly can control them. And then, of course, the climax. America doesn't know how to control her powers until she gets a pep talk, and then suddenly she does. I think there are things that could have been done with the character arcs there, incorporating those moments in with their arcs that would have been probably a little bit better received. But overall, I totally agree with you. I think the character arcs were pretty darn good.
All right, Dave, I'll let you call dibs on this one, but probably the best scene in the film.
Yeah, again, we're talking about how they try to do some different stuff with this. I absolutely love the musical note fight. I think that was absolutely ingenious how that was visualized, and how they incorporated the music into the scene and made all that work. Kudos to everybody on the sound and visual effects teams, because they worked perfectly hand in hand to create something we absolutely 100% had not seen before. The scene was by far the best in the movie. I will say that I wished that level of inventiveness had been dialed up a little bit in some of the other scenes. I think there's just something about really going weird that I don't think the MCU is not 100% willing to do yet. Can you imagine a whole movie with nothing but fight scenes like this? Like, it would that be well received by the general movie going audience, or would they just all come out saying, well, that movie was weird, like, but I would live for something that just goes that off the wall for the entire runtime. It was an absolute highlight, and so appreciated in an already very cool, visually speaking movie, to have a fight scene that was so off the wall.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. And like, I mean, bringing classical music to like one of the high points of your film was just really, really cool. And like having the score punch right at the moment of impact of those musical notes was just like a chef's kiss. It was perfect.
Totally, man. All right, so your final like for the film, Kris, what have you got?
Okay, so I was skeptical and kind of anxious that this film releasing relatively close after Spider-Man No Way Home, and that dealing with the multiverse, and Stephen Strange being a central figure in both films, I was worried that this was going to be super connected universe-y. And so it was not a lot to say about this, but I was pleasantly surprised that it had absolutely nothing to do with that, because there were a lot of loose ends there at the end with like all those villains in the clouds of No Way Home. And I was like, oh gosh, this is how it's going to, rely right next into it. So I was very pleasantly surprised that it had nothing to do with that. And this was a completely different, clean and neat story in and of it.
And I seem to recall, wasn't there like the big reshuffling that happened at one point because stuff didn't fall the way they wanted to, so they reordered some movies? I seem to recall reading at one point that Multiverse of Madness was supposed to come out at one point before No Way Home. Am I misremembering something there, Kris?
I think you're right. I'm not 100% certain.
So it's very possible that, No Way Home changed to incorporate a lot more Doctor Strange, because they had to reorder the movies, and that this movie was like originally supposed to come before, and maybe originally the plan was that whatever was happening in No Way Home was going to be more connected to America Chavez, or maybe it had something to do with the fact that, Strange had traveled the multiverse and now his magic was off or something. Like, I feel like there's a cart before horse situation here. Something got reordered, and that's probably why we didn't get more connections. Like, I would have not been surprised, given the order of how these movies were released, if they would have had like a Spider-Man variant on the Illuminati, for example, like that would have been logical given what they did with the previous movie, but they did not. And I think that gives me that vibe that maybe the order of the movies changed or something at some point. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised as well that there wasn't more callback, other than, the question arising whether, Spider-Man, spins webs out of his butt, which is a valid concern, I think.
I thought that was really funny, given, the fact that Sam Raimi was the director. So that was a really fun note. Although the thought of Peter being on the Illuminati, speaking of in over his head like he usually is, that just does not fit. So I'm glad that did not happen.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but you know how the rumor mongers are when it comes to these MCU movies.
All right, let's head into the negatives with 3 dislikes each here. Dave, what is your first dislike of the film?
Have you watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, Kris?
No, but I'm dying to.
So I've watched a chunk of it. I haven't finished it because it's notoriously difficult for me to get time to watch movies. And it is not fair to compare the two movies because they work completely differently, even though they both work with the multiverse. But I think the one area that I think is fair to point out is that for a Multiverse of Madness movie, there wasn't a whole lot of multiverse. As far as what we see from like other universes and the like. I mean, the beginning of the movie is not technically in its own universe. They're just in that like place, dimension, whatever, looking for the Book of Vishanti. Fine, okay. Then we have the MCU, and then for the bulk of the movie, you're basically dealing with the main MCU, and then this one parallel universe with the Illuminati in it, and that's pretty much it. except for a very, very small note at the end with that destroyed universe, which basically means at most we're looking at 3 distinct universes in a movie over 2 hours long. And if you compare that to something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, it just feels like there's a different universe like every 10 minutes or something. It's just like it's constantly throwing like interesting variations of the characters at you. And I feel like this is really where the movie came short in living up to its title. There was some madness there for sure, but it didn't feel so much as a multiverse. It felt more like a triple verse. They just didn't do a whole lot with like really leaning into, how many variants of Doctor Strange can we throw at the wall and see what sticks, for example, like really lean into the concept. And I think the problem that we're going to end up with is between this movie now and No Way Home, there is already unrest, I would say, in the fan base a little bit, that maybe the multiverse thing is about to be played out. We also have that movie that shall not be named on the DC side coming soon that's going to deal with multiverse. And so general audiences are like already, more multiverse? Don't you have any other tricks? And this fad, if you will, is going to go away before any one movie has a chance to really lean into it and go full bonkers with it like you can. And I think that is going to be the great missed opportunity of the multiverse concept, is that we're never going to get an MCU movie that's just like, absolutely bonkers. Like let's have 10 different Doctor Strangers standing there talking to it. Council of Reeds, anybody, like any of that stuff is just going to go away because the multiverse fad is going to start fading. So I don't think the movie did enough with what may be the last throes of this concept on the big screen. I mean, in the comic books, we'll go multiverse till the cows come home. We've not gotten tired of that yet, and we never will. But on the big screen, general audiences are fickle. I think we're missing an opportunity here, perhaps, Kris.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. My one hope that I'm holding out for is how incredibly amazing Jonathan Majors was as Kang in Loki. So Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, like I'm excited about that and seeing him return to the character and kind of being the master of the multiverse, if you will. So like that's the one thing I'm holding out hope for. But I totally agree. I mean, like at most 3 universes. It was particularly a letdown for me when we saw that scene that I referenced earlier where they're traveling through all those different universes. And so like kind of setting up these high expectations that I had for like the remainder of the film, and then being limited to 3 universes was quite a downer there. You go from, a universe in which they're freaking paint to just like, these are standard universes with like a different Instagram filter. So yeah, it was disappointing for sure.
All right, Kris, so what is your first big dislike of the movie? I think we're going to have something to talk about here.
The Fail-Luminati. I mean, you talk about just a hint at where we're going, nerd commendations next week maybe, but the Illuminantes, which is sheer genius marketing, by the way, the Illuminantes would wipe the floor with this Illuminati. It was, I mean, for all of the hype surrounding this film, and this kind of plays into the not enough multiverse type of situation, but like all of these cameo queens showing up, for them to get destroyed immediately was very disappointing. While I will say, it was really awesome to see Wanda go unhinged and just destroy everybody. I would have liked to have seen that fight go on just a tad longer, because we made up all this hype around the Illuminati showing up and all these characters that people have waited so long to see on the screen in the MCU, just for them to be deleted within a matter of seconds. It was very disappointing.
Yeah, I think that is the nature of what you get when you're looking for cameo. You're packing a whole bunch of cameos in there. None of the characters are going to be serviced particularly well. And I think that's exactly what we got here. I think the Illuminati were cannon fodder. And so, they're introduced, and you think, oh, this is going to be really cool. And then they just like kill them all. That's for the one shock value, this typical horror movie thing. Introduce a bunch of characters and kill them off one by one. And also just, I think there's a certain amount of wish fulfillment there, and then messing with expectations, because on the one hand everybody's like, oh my god, Charles Xavier's gonna, Patrick Stewart's gonna be back, and they were like, yes, he's back, but we're gonna kill him off in like 2 scenes. And then oh, where does the movie go from here? It's a nice play with the expectations. That being said, it would have been nice if they would have done something. I mean, you can kill a whole bunch of characters like that in a superhero scenario, and still have them have some kind of like victory where, they're all throwing themselves at this enemy, sacrificing themselves one by one, but it's, they're buying time to execute some kind of plan or something. But, they were so uncoordinated and flailing about, and everybody was doing their own thing, and they never really truly worked together in an effective way. And ultimately, they didn't really accomplish anything they set out to accomplish in that whole sequence. So I think you could have had that cannon fodder nature of the characters and still done something, worthwhile with all those deaths by having them be meaningful sacrifices. I think that's a big missed opportunity. I mean, these are the people who helped defeat Thanos without having to have a snap and a 5-year whole, everybody's gone thing, or half of the universe is gone thing. Like, they must have been at least competent at some point or another, you would think. But they did not seem competent in that sequence at all.
I will say, one caveat, the what mouth scene legitimately shook me to my core. So that part was amazing. But like, so if I were like plotting that out, I would have had that, and then the other ones were like, oh my god, and then they had to kick it into high gear, and then the fight lasted a little bit longer, and it did. I just needed a little bit longer. Good gracious. Also, her giving Patrick Stewart the Cassandra Nova treatment from Emma Frost in Morrison's New X-Men was poetic justice in a sense. So legitimately made me scream there too.
Oh, absolutely. All right, Kris, that brings me to my next dislike. I'm going to go ahead and make my own transition here. And I'm just going to tell you that I'm very, very unhappy with one aspect of this movie that I think bears further examination. So I have no problem, like so much of the social media sphere, in turning Wanda into a villain in this movie. I think it works incredibly well, and I think it probably was the right thing for this movie. However, what I didn't really like is that it creates a huge disconnect between the ending of WandaVision and the beginning of this movie. And there is a cheap answer to that, and it is extremely cheap, because, again, you were just praising the movie for the character arcs and how the characters developed throughout the movie. But if you reach the end of WandaVision, you have Wanda coming to her senses, realizing that, she's taken this whole town hostage, that she was wrong to do it. She has sincere regret. And she goes off basically to, think about what she's done wrong and try to figure out a way to restore her kids. And then by the beginning of this movie, she's just like full on evil, and it's like, contemplating already, murdering a variant of herself, like right out of the gate, so she can steal her own kids away from herself. And there's a big disconnect there, I think. And it also leads to a pretty significant question. And that is, what about Vision? A character that had this really emotional send-off, yet a version of the character was, for all intents and purposes, alive. We had, that fully white Vision at the end of WandaVision, and yet Wanda never makes an attempt to maybe go find him, restore his memories and his personality, maybe work together to restore their kids. Nothing. It's just immediately like, I read this book and now I have a taste for murder. And I know it's the corruption of the Darkhold and all that, but that's so cheap when we're talking about a movie that tries really hard to have strong character arcs. There's just this huge disconnect between where we left Wanda and where we picked up. And I think we're missing a piece there, you know, and it would have been smart to have that piece in this movie, even if it's a montage of her, you know, trying and failing again and again to restore her kids, and then, you know, coming across this idea of the multiverse, just like some kind of like 3-minute montage, whatever, to kind of explain this disconnect a little bit and make us feel like this story and WandaVision are of a cloth. Whereas WandaVision was about grief and trying to overcome grief. You know, we leave her in a place where you think she's getting there and she's going to be okay in the long run, and then suddenly it's like, nope, murder time, and it's just a disconnect, man. And I didn't, as a big fan of WandaVision and how it too experimented with the MCU formula and all it did, I was not happy that they didn't find a better way for this villain turn to happen. It felt, you know what it felt like? It felt like 90s WWE when Stone Cold Steve Austin comes running out with a steel chair, and you think he's going to help the good guy, and then he turns the steel chair around and hits the good guy with it, and you're like, oh no, shock value heel turn. It came out of nowhere, no foreshadowing, no reason, boom, I'm a bad guy now. That's what it felt like. And I think that did a disservice to the movie.
Yeah, I think it's the Deus Ex Darkhold of it all. And I think, well, I buy into that. Like I said earlier, like I see like succumbing to that grief or that trauma and making irrational decisions, because, you know, that's something I've seen happen before, and specifically with something like the Darkhold. But I think that it would have benefited, like you said, from like a 3 to 5 minute scene, just kind of like a continuation from WandaVision. We left off with her levitating and reading the Darkhold, but just to see like a connective thread and a continuation of that. I think it probably would have had to have been placed after the reveal, because that was a cool moment where she like accidentally says America's name, and then like everything, like the gig is up and the veil is removed. So then like it may have had to have been a flashback scene. But yeah, I think it was relying a little bit too much on something like the Darkhold to do that much heavy lifting.
Yeah, that right there is really my problem. You know, I've been corrupted by the bad book is not great, you know, character development, I guess is what I'm saying. All right, Kris, what is your next dislike? And here, too, I'd actually find myself strongly agreeing with you.
Yeah, so while I was a fan of the 3 major character arcs, one character arc that was very disappointing to me, particularly as this character has shown up in recent MCU projects, and I've really been excited about where this character is going. I'm not a fan of wimping out Wong. For Pete's sake, he's the Sorcerer Supreme, and he gets washed in every single fight in this movie. He kicks butt in, you know, Shang-Chi. He kicks butt in, you know, No Way Home. And then like he suddenly becomes an inept, like comedic joke here in this film with how easily, you know, he gets wiped out. And so like justice for Wong. I mean, like I love like the whole, I'm not a part of this. Like I'm getting too old for this type of vibe where he's like, he can't be bothered. I'm the Sorcerer Supreme. Like I'm over this type of stuff. And so seeing him get wiped out so easily was very, very disappointing.
Yeah, you know, Wong is really weird in this one. I don't. That's one of the things I was hinting at when we were talking about like character arcs, and like, you know, Wong doesn't have one. There is no Wong character arc. In fact, he's wildly inconsistent from scene to scene. You know, for example, in one point he says, you know, she can't be allowed to possess the Darkhold, and then, you know, one of his you know, other sorcerers sacrifices herself to destroy the Darkhold, and that's like, you know, that's it. You know, she's finished. And then she like threatens like a couple of other random like set extras, and he's like, no, totes, I'm gonna give you the other Darkhold version, no problem. Like, and then by the end of the movie, he's all like, you need to kill America Chavez and take her power so we can defeat the Scarlet Witch. And I'm like, dude, how about you just let these other 2 random extras die and not tell her where, you know, she can find a new copy of the book, and we wouldn't have this problem. Like, he's wildly inconsistent across the movie, whether he's willing to sacrifice or not willing to sacrifice, how far he's willing to go. Wong is not quite himself in this movie, and that is definitely a writing issue.
Speaking of which, the fact that we didn't get more of Rintra the Minotaur, I mean, like, talk about not going for it and not being imaginative enough. Like, how are you going to give us a green-skinned Minotaur and then completely just shelf him, as like the sacrificial lamb? It was crazy. So, like, let me shoehorn that one in here.
I'm going to tell you something funny, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm totally leaving this in the edit. My phone is blowing up right now because apparently I have once again said something that made Snyder fans angry. And so I'm getting all these notifications on social media that the Snyder horde is after me again. I dared say something on social media about Superman again, and they're all coming after me.
What were you thinking?
I don't know, man. I don't know why I keep talking about my all-time favorite character on social media. I should just know my role and shut my mouth, right?
Another reference. Hey. Don't be a jabroni online.
It's a wrestling kind of day, I guess.
All right. Is that the ice cream song I hear, Dave?
Dude.
I was going to lead with that in the tease, but then I was like, I don't want to scare off fans.
Jesus, Mary and Joseph, man. What happened to those kids? They are the same kids as from WandaVision. And they were fantastic in WandaVision. There was some really heartbreaking acting going on. You know, like when their pet died and all that. That was some fantastic stuff. These kids are very, very skilled actors. And then we get whatever the crap is happening in this movie. I don't know if Sam Raimi is just not good at directing kids, if the writing just wasn't there. I don't know, but it's not just the ice cream song. It's also like really this overwrought, over-dramatic stuff they do. Like, oh no, it's a witch, it's a witch.
Let's throw stuffed animals at her.
Like, dude, it's literally a woman that looks like your mom.
And you did not pick up on that? Come on.
Yeah, you were like, oh, it's a witch, it's a witch. I'm like, dude, it's just...
She turned me into a newt. Go
exactly. And that's the problem right here with the movie is I wouldn't fight to have these little brats back from the multiverse. Like really? This is who you're bending, reality for and everything. It's the kids that throw stuffed animals at you because they don't recognize you as the mother. It's just absolutely bizarre. But yeah, the acting was very, very weird from a couple of actors that for child actors are incredibly skilled and did a really good job in WandaVision. And I'm just doubting my sanity in how they suddenly lost all that skill. I think it almost feels like George Lucas directing Hayden Christensen. The guy can act, but somehow everything that's actually in the final cut doesn't make it look like he can. Like, we know these kids can act, but in this movie, it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I'm going to backpedal a little bit because it made me think of something that you said earlier. I forgot to comment on. The fact that, Vision is not present, at least in this 838 universe, is really weird. I don't know if that's a consistent thing in all the other multiverses. Is she a single mom in everyone? Did Vision die in every time? That's weird. Also, can someone set Homegirl up with an online dating profile? Help her out. Maybe we could save the multiverse.
I think she definitely would benefit from having a little more Vision in her life. Hey, but yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that's one of the problems that we come across a lot in the MCU. It's not just about the dating thing. It's also just about the abandonment thing, like people get abandoned a lot in the MCU. It feels like something traumatic happens to them and then they're just left to their own devices. And we'll look at what happened with Hawkeye. Nobody thought to maybe pick up the phone and check on him in 5 years or something. Wanda gets left alone. My God, if you looked at Avenger Con in Miss Marvel in that first episode, they're talking about the sacrifices made by Black Widow, right? But not a word about Vision getting killed. And so it's very, very odd and very selective. And it's like nobody has stood up in universe and said, maybe we should support each other a little bit better. Black Widow was running around talking about how she found a new family in the Avengers, but these people don't take care of each other for squat.
Yeah, Falcon can't even get a home loan or anything. Like, that's messed up.
Yeah, that is totally messed up. But again, it's that abandonment thing. Like, people keep getting abandoned in these movies. There would be something interesting if somebody would pull on that thread and maybe, do something storytelling wise with that. Like, why don't we take care of each other better? Get a mental health care plan for the Avengers or something.
Maybe Scott Lang hasn't released that podcast episode yet.
Hey,
that's the most so, like, not to put the cart before the horse, but that's like the most perfect thing ever.
It's the most Scott Lang.
It's the most Scott Lang, yeah.
All right, so your final dislike, Kris, is it's a whopper.
Yeah, so I'm going to make some people mad here, but I'm sorry. John Krasinski as Reed Richards does nothing for me. I'm a super fan of The Office, and so I love John Krasinski and his work, but I think this is the most fan service-y thing that I've ever seen in a superhero film. The suit looks amazing, but as far as the delivery, it didn't give me a single thing. And I know it was only like 2 scenes, but like that doesn't give me Reed Richards vibes. I really hope that this is just a touchstone like Sir Patrick Stewart and like a very fan servicey thing, which I know that I always say nostalgia is a hell of a drug, but when they had the X-Men animated series theme combined with the yellow wheelchair, I did get goosebumps, admittedly. But I hope that this is just a touchstone and we move on to something else. I hope that John Krasinski is a pretty busy guy, so that gives me hope that he will not be the Reed Richards going forward. But I did not see it. It was not for me, and I hope that we get much more inspired casting moving forward.
Yeah, so I think that is absolutely fair. Now, I will say that I know a lot of Office fans struggle to see him as anything other than the character from that show. As somebody who's never really delved too deep into The Office, I have a very different view, I think, of John Krasinski. Like, I thought that Amazon Prime show, particularly the first season that he did, where he's like more of an action actor, I worked shockingly well. I really liked him in A Quiet Place. That's a really, really good horror movie. I liked it a lot. So I didn't have a problem with visualizing him as a Reed Richards type character. But I will say that I agree that the acting wasn't there, but I don't think the acting needed to be there. I think this is basically, this is the MCU version of shut up about it, right? Fans have been, fan casting him forever. Here you have, 3 minutes with him as that character. Now let's move on, okay? Like, we're going to try something different in the MCU. And I think that's ultimately what we're going to get. Did I mind him in the role? No, but I also don't think he came with his best acting hat. Imagine if he would have come in there and he would have blown everybody away. It would have just made those voices louder. I almost feel like he kind of phoned it in because I don't think he really has an interest in the role.
I don't think yeah.
And a lot of people who are like casting his wife as Sue Storm, Emily Blunt, I adore her. Like, I adore her in like 40 different ways. I've never seen her in a movie that I didn't enjoy her acting in, and she would be totally awesome as Sue Storm. But she seems to have even less interest in the possibility. So it felt to me like maybe he just walked in there, he phoned it in for everybody to basically go, well, that was underwhelming. Let's just go ahead and redirect our fan casting energies, and that, maybe they finally leave him alone about it and leave his wife alone about it, and they can go about their own projects again. Do I think that John Krasinski is perfectly capable of acting in a strong Fantastic Four movie as Reed Richards? Absolutely, I believe that. Do I think that's necessarily the most inspired choice? Certainly not. And much like the throves of people online who keep saying, that they want Ben Affleck to play Batman again. Like, the dude's finished with it. He don't want to do it. Stop harassing the guy, And I think that's what it's coming down with John Krasinski and Emily Blunt. I just don't think they want this. And so let's you got your little fan moment. Let's let them be and maybe think about something that might be a little bit more innovative for a Fantastic Four movie.
Now, I'm coloring outside the lines again. with a like here in the late stages of the episode. But I will say, as much as I did not enjoy that, we got full Blackagar Boltagon, and as a super fan of Anson Mount, I love me some Christopher Pike. I know that Inhumans was an abject disaster, probably the worst thing that Marvel Studios has ever put out there. But holy crap, if we get a full-on Black Bolt, I would not be upset.
I wouldn't either. Again, the Inhumans thing, my strongest connection really to the Inhumans comes just through, Ms. Marvel. And given the revelations of, of episode 3 of Ms. Marvel, that doesn't seem to be like a connection that's going to exist in the MCU. So as far as the Inhumans go, take it or leave it. I just want the big puppy. Like Ms. Marvel needs a big puppy. And then I'm good.
You know who else does? Iman Vellani.
Well, let's just say that she has absolutely flawless taste. Every interview I've seen with her, she's absolutely 100% spot on with what she's saying. So she seems to be a fan herself, which is just really, really cool.
All right, that wraps up our Byword Big Talk for this week. Our likes, our dislikes, and everything in between of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which is now streaming on Disney+. So watch along with us. Tell us your likes and dislikes. Hit us up on social media at NerdByword on Twitter and Instagram. But when we come back from our final break, we're giving you 2 more nerd commendations exclusively set in the 1980s. Stick around. All right, we're back for everybody's fan favorite segment. You know it as... Commendations. All right, it's an 80s off, Dave. You're up first.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and punt back for a second and explain something. I have always been a guy that prefers, obscure, smaller stuff rather than the big hits. I had my issues with, back in the day when Titanic was first released and everybody was talking about it, that I didn't watch it for like years afterwards because I was sick of everybody talking about it. And I did the same thing several times after that. Notably, The Matrix was something that I avoided for a long time. I'm definitely avoiding Morbius because I'm sick and tired of the Morbin time memes. But one thing that I didn't avoid, because I guess I had a chance to watch it before the hype train really went through the roof and I could get sick of it, is Stranger Things. As a child of the 80s, it was a very, very cool show for the time period it's set in. There's really good writing there. It has those horror vibes that I appreciate so much. And it has a little bit of that old Amblin spark of like those old like kids getting in trouble movies from the 80s, I'm talking like, Goonies and E.T. and that kind of stuff, that it actually really spoke to me right from the get-go. And so naturally we have now Stranger Things season 4 already. And although I haven't finished the season completely yet, I'm a good batch of episodes in, and I have to say, man, it's just as good as previous seasons. In fact, I think there's an episode in here that stands out enough that I think it could be like a big award winner. Acting, visual effects, all sorts of stuff. I would not be surprised if it starts shoveling some awards. So Stranger Things obviously is about a group of kids that is fighting some supernatural evils in their hometown of Hawkins. And of course features a character, a young girl who has some superpowers called 11. Season 4 picks up with part of the cast relocating to California, and 11 being depowered for all intents and purposes. A new evil rises in their hometown, and 11 now needs to find a way to get her powers back. And I have to say, once again, the cast of this show is absolutely ridiculous. The acting is so strong throughout. It's absolutely fun to watch. The chemistry between the individual actors is through the roof. Every time that they add new characters, those characters mesh in well with the rest of the group. There's just really a lot of fun to be had with this. The 1980s setting never lets me down, from the obscurest little references to guest stars like Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger himself popping up. There was a shot of a television screen showing the Ewoks cartoon in one of the episodes. I mean, all of this 80s-ness of it all. And I know a lot of people are talking about, the 80s fad is fading. We don't need 80s set stuff anymore. But, Stranger Things is sort of its own thing here. And even if you're kind of getting tired of the 80s set thing, there's so much other stuff going on here. Strong visual effects, good writing, great acting, cool horror vibes, that even if you're tired of that setting, I think there's something here to love. So, although I'm concerned about some of my favorite characters as I kind of get into the final stretch of the season and whether they're going to make it out alive, I'm just so pleased that even, in its fourth season, this show is still firing on all cylinders, and we still have one final season, season 5, to come. So if you've not jumped on the Stranger Things bandwagon, you should. And if you have been, watching the other 3 seasons and you're wondering if season 4 is any good, yes, it is. And you should definitely check it out.
I think I'm going to probably have to succumb to the wave of popularity for Stranger Things, if for no other reason that my daughter is like the resident evangelist, if you will, of all things Stranger Things. So she almost like pops in and asks me every day if I've watched it yet. So she's very much obsessed with it. So I may have to take the dive.
Yeah, and I can't wait to talk to you about it once you do. Maybe we can have like a Stranger Things episode where we kind of dive into what we like and dislike about the show. I think that'd be interesting. All right, so Kris, you're staying in the 80s, believe it or not. What have you got?
Yeah, so not even having seen Stranger Things, I immediately saw this game listed on Xbox Game Pass and got Stranger Things vibes immediately. I showed it to my daughter. She's like, yeah, it looks like Stranger Things. So Generation Zero is an open-world co-op first-person shooter survival game that can be played online with 3 other people or solo. The game is set in 1989 in a post-apocalyptic alternate reality Sweden, which has become overrun by killer robot machines. The robots vary in size from small spotting drones, lightly armed scouting bots, all the way up to larger bots that loom over the houses. The player assumes the role of a Swedish teenager who, upon returning from an island excursion, finds that the local population has vanished as a result of the robotic invasion. The player must survive the Swedish wilderness while attempting to both determine the fate of those who used to live there as well as find a way to defeat the machines. And this game's really fun and like a low stakes, just kind of plop in and shoot up robots and looter shooter type of game. It's really fun. You get to customize your character with gear. You can be like a stereotypical nerd with big glasses and like a cardigan and a digital watch, or you can be like a punk rock kid, or you can be a preppy kid with a Letterman's jacket and fully customize your character. And it's really cool. Like the landscape alone of Sweden is just majestic and beautiful to watch unfold. And then going back and forth between these safe houses and bunkers and, creating a storehouse of inventory and building up your repertoire is just really, really fun. It's like not a really like huge commitment to play. It's just fun to blast up some robots, and visually alone, it's worth the no extra cost on Xbox Game Pass. For some reason, it looks like the reviews are kind of low on this. Maybe people had higher expectations, but it was a self-developed game, self-published by Avalanche Studios, was released in the March of 2019, but I really enjoy it. And like I said, it's not a whole huge commitment. You could just kind of play whenever you want and shoot up some robots and have a good time.
It sounds absolutely up my alley, and I'm definitely going to download that just as soon as I get to your one of your other recommendations, that darn TMNT game.
Oh man,
I can't wait to give that one a shot, but I think I'm going to put Generation Zero next on my list.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword. We thank you so much for hanging out with us. Be sure to give a 5-star rating and review wherever you get podcasts, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Amazon Music, or our fancy new website, thanks to Dave, nerd-byword.com.
And find us on social media, where we always are interested to hear what you have to say about our show. Criticisms, suggestions, we're here for all of it. You can find us individually at That Nerd Kris and at That Nerd Dave, and of course also at Nerd Byword.
And be sure to slide into the Discord server where you can chat about comics, video games, give us your own nerd commendations, give us ideas for future episodes and what you thought of previous ones. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.